A huge proportion of the jazz standards that our musical heroes played, and that we all still play today, were written by a relatively small pool of musical theater composers. Right now, you're hearing John Coltrane's unbelievable band performing Rodgers and Hammerstein's 1959 mega hit, My Favorite Things from The Sound of Music. We all take it for granted today, but when you really think about it, the situation is kind of wild. The Sound of Music opened on Broadway on November 16th, 1959. Miles Davis bought a soprano saxophone for Train in Paris on March 21st, 1960. According to drummer Pete LaRocca, they were playing My Favorite Things by August of that year. And on October 21st, Coltrane recorded the song for Atlantic. That means that within 10 months, amidst the whirlwind era when he recorded Kind of Blue and Giant Steps, John Coltrane was also hip to a new Broadway musical that critics derided as for children of all ages, from 6 to 11 and a half. It's not like the label Atlantic was putting any kind of pressure on Train to record My Favorite Things. The cast album for The Sound of Music had just come out, and it wasn't an immediate hit. What's more, Ethan Iverson told me just yesterday that McCoy Tyner's piano part was lifted straight from the original sheet music. McCoy, by the way, initially disliked the song. So Train got his hands on the sheet music almost as soon as it came out. He was then open-minded enough to ignore Oscar Hammerstein's on-brand lyrical fluff.
There's a lot about Oscar's lyrics that, I find wet and embarrassing, His ornithological obsession, the fact that there is a bird in every single lyric that he's ever written. If it's not a lark, it's a willow, it's a hummingbird, it's a whip. Yeah. It just, that kind of nature imagery makes me cringe.
And recognized the brilliance of Richard Rodgers' composition enough to want to bring it in to ask his band to play it. Really think about this. This would be somewhat equivalent to if Ambrose Akinmusire recorded Let It Go back in 2014. Train even went so far as to tell Francois Postif, I would have loved to have written My Favorite Things, but it's by Rodgers and Hammerstein. It's my favorite piece of all those I have recorded. So recently, a few factors converged for me personally that caused me to take a renewed interest in musical theater. On his blog, Do the Math, which is like the Bible for jazz dorks, Ethan Iverson wrote a post for his NEC students called Deepening Your Relationship with Musical Theater, in which he proselytizes for accumulating as much of the original sheet music from shows as possible and then learning as many of their hits as one can. Inspired by this, I bought a copy of Ted Gioia's The Jazz Standards and began filling in holes in my own repertoire. Simultaneously, I read Todd S. Purdum's Something Wonderful, a book about Rodgers and Hammerstein's legendary musical partnership. It just occurred to me that for someone like myself, who has been working professionally on Broadway for 10 years now, it's amazing that I don't know more about musical theater's history. See, in music school, jazz majors are asked to learn dozens, if not hundreds, of songs by the likes of Porter, Kern, Berlin, Van Heusen, Rodgers, and the like. Speaking from my own personal experience, we almost never bother to internalize the lyrics, or watch the shows these songs come from, or research the composers who wrote them. And we most certainly don't incorporate new Broadway tunes into our repertoire these days. So to think about someone like John Coltrane, one of the most serious music students and excellent composers of the 20th century, digging Rodgers and Hammerstein is kind of surprising, actually. Alright, I was kind of a musical theater nerd in high school. I was exposed to all the contemporary musicals. Of these, my favorite was The Light in the Piazza by Adam Guettel, and over the ensuing years, I enjoyed bringing a lead sheet of one of the songs from that show, Say It Somehow, to sessions to play with my friends. So I reached out to Adam Guettel to get the perspective of a multiple Tony-winning musical theater composer about this very topic. Along the way, I analyzed Say It Somehow, and now I'm going to tell you about why I think it is a good song and deserves to be played. And I'm going to suggest to you that there's probably a treasure trove of great material to be explored in modern day musical theater. Maybe, just maybe, there are even a few new jazz standards to be found. This is Score Study with me, Brian Krock. 1, 2, 3, 4. Elizabeth Spencer published the novella The Light in the Piazza in 1960. According to good old Wikipedia,
the story is set in the 1950s and revolves around Margaret Johnson, a wealthy Southern woman, and Clara, her daughter, who is developmentally disabled due to a childhood accident. The two spend a summer together in Italy. When Clara falls in love with a young Italian man, Margaret is forced to reconsider not only Clara's future, but her own deep-seated hopes and regrets as well.
After the success of The Sound of Music, Oscar Hammerstein briefly considered adapting the story for the stage in 1960, before moving on, deciding that it would be difficult for us to adapt it as a musical play. How fitting then that 40 years later, Richard Rodgers' grandson, Adam Guettel, decided to tackle the subject. In his eyes, Clara's inability to speak the native language of her Italian love, Fabrizio, all but required music to convey their youthful emotions.
I almost feel like it's my responsibility to pursue things that I think that I think are inherently musical and need music to be told, but that aren't what everyone else is doing, because I don't think I do those things as well anyway. And I've tried. I don't have a knack for it.
You know, The Light in the Piazza requires music to tell the story, which is part of what makes every part of it so cohesive. For example, one thing that I noticed is Clara sings the word From the Heart in Statues and Stories, which is like the first number after the overture of your show. The music,
the rising chromaticism underneath that pedal tone.
Exactly. The music completely changes into this like romanticism, chromaticism, and it just bursts out from her. But then as the story progresses, it sort of like it takes root and it becomes an integral part of all of the music.
Was a dawning day unfurling from the heart.
Guettel's groundbreaking score has taken on a legendary cult classic status. I was so drawn to its intricate chromaticism and complex rhythmic shifts. Ingredients used not to impress, but to convey, as Adam put it, more of a human phrase. You know, another great example that I love is Love to Me, which that rhythmic pattern in and of itself, I'm sure you could spend a whole rehearsal just getting the whole group to...
You think that happens in one rehearsal? I mean, it's a... once you understand what the gesture is supposed to accomplish dramatically, it's a lot more easy to understand the meter.
The day we meet, the way you leaned against the wind, and do not know that you are beautiful.
The meter is actually should be written out differently for the vocalist and the guitarist. It's for the vocalist, it's D da D 1 2 da D da 1 2 3, and for the guitarist, it's the opposite. It's
I see
3 plus 2 plus 2 or 2 plus 3 plus 2 plus 2 or something. We have currently been writing them out differently because you hinge on to something differently if you're singing it, because you have to lean toward the measure line. So dee da da dee ba dee da da ya da 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 dee da dee da da dee da da dee, etc. And the guitarist has to hinge off of something else, and once that gets figured out, then it just sort of sits in.
So as a listener, you would never really know that there's anything unusual happening, because it's very palatable when you have professionals playing it. But I think the effect is sort of, it makes it feel like this, like it expands and contracts. Undulating is how.
Well, you know, the gesture dramatically is that when you're holding on to someone and trying to comfort them, you're not going doink doink, doink, doink. You're usually kind of going doink, doink, doink.
Right.
Doink, doink. You know, more of a human phrase. So that's how that came about.
And in the score, I remember seeing arrows above the full staff. Do you know what I'm talking about? There's an arrow pointing this way, and I don't remember what number that was, but it and then there's groups of 5 notes, groups of 7 notes, there's just all sorts of stuff that you're not used to seeing when you look at a Broadway score. It seems to me that complexity in music really works best when it serves this function. Organicism and humanism are my goals as a composer too. And Guettel's score contains a wealth of stuff like this. He draws a lot of his inspiration from the great 19th and 20th century Western European canon. And for you, that if I'm remembering correctly from things I've heard you say over the years, it's like Ravel is a big point of reference for you.
Just such wonderful music. Yeah.
Yeah. And who are some other of like sort of
Britain, Stravinsky? I mean, my graduation present from high school was the entire Columbia Records Stravinsky collection, which I still have and listen to all the time.
Cool.
In terms of classical, I think my first score that I studied was Cunning Little Vixen by Janacek. Prokofiev, the wit of something like Lieutenant Kiji or the impossibly beautiful sort of elegiac quality of like the Rock 2. Whatever. These things, of course, obsessed me, and I still listen to them all the time. I try to listen to absolutely everything. Arvo Part, and that's an old reference, but
sure.
Even Elliott Carter, and just to kind of get a sense of Conlon Nancaro, really crazy out stuff, because it's just really helpful to get that into your, it's good roughage. Can we go to the piano for a second? I don't know if you'll be able to. If we can't hear it, then we won't do it. Can you see me all right?
I can see you.
Can you hear that?
Yep.
I forget what it does now. But what do you call this?
Adam Guettel is amongst the pantheon of great composers who write with their ears and who don't have much interest in the theoretical implications behind their compositional decisions.
Well, it's very interesting, in watching your videos, Brian, I have been very impressed with your knowledge of, German sixth and Italian things and French, and I'm not diminishing this at all. I happened to barely pass music theory when I was in high school, and barely passed my music classes when I was in college. But for some reason it all stuck with me. But I have no idea what these things are called or what they would look like on the guitar. For instance, when I write on the guitar, I basically just make shapes that sound good. And if I get bored with those, then I just change the tuning on the guitar and make the same shapes and see if I can find some other good things.
I'm really glad that he playfully chastised me about this point, because I really want all of you viewers to understand this. You do not need to know what you're doing in order to write great music. I personally am a big believer in studying scores and analyzing transcriptions and just generally expanding your knowledge. I think that more knowledge will never hurt you. But in reality, I know that many artists simply follow their intuition. And as I've said in previous videos, I also am fully aware of the fact that what I find in my explorations of other people's music does not necessarily reflect their intentions, nor do I think that that matters. To me, analyzing music you love is about understanding more about yourself. Everyone is going to find different things to appreciate in the same piece of music. And what you're drawn to is revealing. So all of this is to say that in no way am I endorsing a dogmatic approach to analysis. I just hope that each of you will be inspired by my excursions to get more and more personal with your own approach to learning. So moving on, last week I released a video of my quartet playing Say It Somehow, my favorite Adam Guettel composition, and a piece that I think clearly shows his gifts for melodic, rhythmic, and harmonic invention. Adam told me that he's always thought of this as a pop song, but I have to be honest when I say I've never heard a pop song quite like this. Let me show you what I mean. First, check out the melody. Remember what Adam said about a more human phrase? Well, in measure 5 of the orchestral score, the melody begins with a 4/3 tuplet that begins on the and of 1. For even a seasoned musician, this rhythm is going to give you pause. In my transcription, I simply wrote eighth notes, but what Adam wrote is way, way better because it compresses those first 4 notes into a shorter span of time, conveying the urgency with which Clara needs to communicate with Fabrizio. Throughout the rest of the tune, I found that my transcription drastically oversimplified the rhythms that Adam was actually hearing in his head. And in every case, the more complicated the rhythms, the more organic, the more human the music sounds. But more so than the melody, what really drew me to this composition was the colorful and surprising harmonic progression. The first 4 chords, C major, E flat 7, A flat major 7, D flat 7, are a fairly common and interesting substitution for the 1-6-2-5 progression that permeates virtually all of classic musical theater music. Today, we generally associate this progression with composer Tadd Dameron, who utilized these changes in his great tune, Lady Bird. He derived them by replacing the latter 3 chords with their tritone substitutions. So E flat instead of A flat instead of D, and D flat instead of G. Tadd Dameron's changes may have partially inspired John Coltrane's Giant Steps chord progression, and I must admit that when I first heard Say It Somehow, I immediately thought of Giant Steps. Measures 5 and 6 feature a walk-down progression that starts on F major, and it moves down to C major over E, and then C minor over E flat. And Adam mentioned in passing to me that he doesn't really believe in using root position chords unless there's a rhetorical reason for it. So you're going to see a lot of slash chords throughout his music. Measure 6 of the A section is 1 beat too long. It's in 5/4. And then measure 7 is 1 beat longer than that. Here again, Adam is breaking out of the cage of 4/4 time and letting the music expand and contract, letting it breathe. To further enhance this effect in my own arrangement of the song, I added moments of complete silence, such as beat 5 in measure 6, to get the band breathing together and to leave moments of fragile emptiness. I specifically chose the moments of silence to immediately follow the densest harmonic moments, such as the A-flat augmented triad that resolves to a G-flat major triad over a G-flat pedal in measure 6. This is the moment when Clara says, "I know you," and later Fabrizio says, "You know me," and it's almost jarring harmonically, resolving as it does to F-sharp major, the tritone away from our home base of C major. Guettel further emphasizes these moments by thinning out the orchestration, telegraphing to us, the listeners, that even though these two lovers are having trouble communicating and just met each other, they're somehow connected. After this, measure 7 features the Tadd Dameron progression again, starting on G7 sus, followed by an E-flat 7, which then resolves to A-flat 7 by way of E-flat's tritone sub, A, which is the root of an F major triad in first inversion. Pause here for a moment and just reflect on how many times we have heard either tritones or slash chords or some elegant combination of both in such a small span of music. In my opinion, these two elements work together to form a cohesive harmonic framework for the song. After this beautiful A section, which is 7 measures or 31 beats long, which is exactly 1 beat shorter than the typical 8 bars of 4/4 time that we usually find in jazz standards, the A section is repeated but expanded to be 9 measures long and 37 beats. Again, all of this is in service of creating a more human phrase. Now, the bridge of this tune begins fairly typically in the subdominant key of F major. However, in measure 21, the harmonic rhythm picks up significantly with a new dense slash chord happening on every single beat. Now, it is no coincidence that at this, the most intense moment of the whole song, our main characters simply give up on groping for words. Instead, their voices lock in to a unison at the octave, while the melody leaps euphorically, and they can do nothing but simply exclaim, "Ah."
They don't speak a word of each other's language at first, and music serves nicely there as both a stand-in for actual language and as a stand-in for a kind of physical communication that comes with that relationship.
Finally, as in a typical AA-BA song form, the A section gets repeated one more time, except this time it's expanded yet again to 12 bars or 50 beats of music. Now the A-flat augmented triad over G pedal is reiterated twice before resolving to B major. The final 3 measures bring us back to our now distant home key of C major in an elegant sleight of hand, where the major third of our B major triad is held over as a common tone with the following D7 flat 9, which is then transformed into the flat 13 of G7, which is the 5 of our home key, C major. Frankly, I haven't even scratched the surface of this wonderfully effective piece of music, let alone the whole score of this incredible piece of musical theater. But I think you get the idea. This is intricate, elaborate music whose details serve the function of bringing the fictional characters' emotions to vivid reality. In other words, complexity for complexity's sake can be cool, yeah, but complexity in the service of humanity, that's way better. Interviewing Adam, doing all this recent research, and then recording Say It Somehow, it's all just left me kind of wondering, why don't we look for new standards in the world of musical theater? Now, obviously, it's complicated. In the 40s and 50s, Broadway musicals supplied the hit songs that everyone knew in America. Sheet music for shows sold extremely well. Remember that John Coltrane owned the original sheets for My Favorite Things right after they came out. But in the 1950s and in the 60s, tape editing and multi-track recording completely revolutionized the way that music was produced and therefore consumed. So pop music became the new source for hit songs, and thus you saw artists in the world of jazz utilizing pop songs by, say, the Beatles as sources for improvisation. And that tradition has largely continued into the 21st century. So you saw artists like The Bad Plus and Brad Mehldau covering radio singles. I mean, Joshua Redman even covered a John Mayer song recently. But there really are great songs being composed by not just Adam Guettel, but other musical theater composers like Jason Robert Brown, Robert Lopez and Kristen Anderson Lopez, Janine Tesori, Anais Mitchell, and Lin-Manuel Miranda. So I don't really know exactly what my point is. I'm just sort of suggesting that we should maybe follow John Coltrane's lead and look past the gaudy trappings of musical theater. Maybe some of you out there will stumble upon some really great compositions that you can bring into jam sessions to reinterpret with your bandmates. Maybe we can begin to add some new tunes to the list of required standards that, frankly, hasn't changed in decades. Thank you everybody for watching. As usual, I'm just gonna give you my frickin' pitch for Patreon. Please go check out my page. There's an entire hour-and-a-half long interview with Adam Guettel up there. There's sheet music and exercises and tons and tons and tons of stuff. I'm about to hit 15,000 subscribers on YouTube, as well as 100 patrons. And so what that means is I'm starting a Discord server, and I'm gonna start doing live stream hangs with my patrons. So you might wanna check that out. Anyways, thank you and stay tuned. There's more coming your way. Hello. Hi. Good, I literally just finished recording.